understand Hashem better. The purpose of davening the effect of davening is to strengthen your bond with your creator. It's a personal thing, with the one who created you. In study, if you study Gemara, you study Chumash, you study Halacha, even if you study Hasidus, you want to understand the subject matter. So if you study a page of Talmud, you don't understand it, you certainly should not be pleased with that result. And one might even question whether or not you studied. So what did you learn? What information did you absorb and assimilate? In davening, it's not a question of, did you understand what you were saying? It doesn't make a difference if I understood what I was saying. I was talking to God. And he certainly knows what I was saying. But it's almost as if to say, in study, God is talking to you. And you have to understand what he's trying to say. So if someone talks to you and you don't understand the language, it's very difficult communication, if any. But like a baby with a mother the baby is crying, the mother might not exactly understand what the baby wants or needs, but she senses something. And of course, as we see the miracle of motherhood, it's amazing. They figure out eventually what's bothering the child, whether it's hungry or needs to be soothed or something like that. Okay, so the takeaway is when we daven, we're children talking to God. When we're studying, we're students of Torah. Okay, let's go into the Tanya on page Kuf Yud Beis, opposite 222. We ended off with the concept that Hashem, the infinite, is revealed through the 613 commandments of the Torah, and therefore, to a certain extent, the Torah is in the image of a man, because the Torah is the way God reveals himself in the 613 forms or expressions, which we call mitzvahs. And every time we do one of those mitzvahs, we are in the presence of and connecting with Hashem. Almost in the middle of the page, Kuf Yud Beis, the third word on the line. V'hinei af shegilui zay de'esa katera v'mitzvahs hu shava l'chol nefesh me'yisrael b'derech klal. Even though, in general, any Jew, in other words, the most pious, the most learned, to the least pious and the least learned, if they're occupying themselves with a form of study or they're doing a mitzvah, so each one on their level is connecting through this particular ray of godliness, or this particular energy. That's in general. We all have one Torah. So just because someone is a tremendously great Torah scholar and someone is just beginning at the age of 14 to read Hebrew, we still all have the same Torah and we all have the same commandments to fulfill, even though clearly there's a major difference between them. So on any level, at any time, any Jew who does Torah and mitzvahs is connecting to that ray of light which is being expressed through Torah mitzvahs. But that's in general. But now we go into specific. Afal became even so, b'derech prat, in a particular way. Not all souls, not all spirits are equal. Lefi eis uzman, Gilgulim uvayim b'elam hazeh. Not every neshama, the way it is in this time and place. For example, we're in America in this particular day of the year is it's different the way we're going to experience Torah and mitzvahs than it was 600 years ago in Europe. K'maimar Razal, and this is expressed or hinted to in the sages, in the words of the sages, where one of the great rabbis was asked, Avuch, your father, b'mai have zarat fei. What was he very careful in? What was his outstanding mitzvah? Malay b'tzitzit. So he told him that what make I don't know why I hear it. Okay. Malay b'tzitzis, he said it's with tzitzis that he's outstanding chuli. Now it's clear that this great rabbi kept all of the mitzvahs. So what was the response? That he was very zohir, very scrupulous in tzitzis. So here Chassidus gives a novel interpretation. The word zohir, which we interpret as being very careful or scrupulous, the word itself has the word light, like zohar, right? Illumination. So really what he was asked is, your father, he kept all the Torah mitzvahs, but in which mitzvah did he both feel and express the light of God? And the answer was through tzitzis, because each and every Jew has a mitzvah in which not only does he connect to Hashem, but he shines personally, and through his own shining and his own scrupulousness or his own meticulous adherence to this mitzvah, he brings out the godliness in this world. So let me explain very, very broadly and very simply. Let's say all of us are obligated to be kind. Okay, that's an obligation, to be kind to a fellow, especially to a fellow Jew, or love a fellow Jew like yourself. At the same time, we know that there are certain very religious, very fine individuals that they're not outstanding in this. They might be more outstanding in study, or even if they're scrupulous in the commandment to give up to 20% of their money to charity, you could tell that there's no special love for this mitzvah. They just do it out of obligation. And then there's the person that we all know and admire, the expression, he takes the shirt off his own back. I mean, he has a chush, he has a feeling for doing favors. He actually not only does help, he wants to help. And then when you thank him profusely, he says, stop, don't thank me. It was no bother, it was no problem, it was my pleasure. Please call me. If you really want to thank me, call me again. And he means it sincerely. So he put on tefillin that day, you put on tefillin that day. But when you put on tefillin that day, you actually meditated, you actually felt something, you were, your tefillin is the nicest, you have it checked every single year. It's a big thing. You study about it, you're proud of it, etc. This guy who's so friendly and so nice and so beautiful towards a fellow Jew, he puts on tefillin, but it's not an afterthought, but it's routine. So you shine in your tefillin, he shines in his chesed. Someone else shines in his study of Torah. I mean, you could actually see his hour of study and my hour. My hour of study is grudgingly. And I'll keep looking at the clock that I finish my hour of study, and I thank God that there's a disturbance, so I don't have to study. I can go upstairs and answer the phone. It's an emergency. And this person, when he studies, that's where he shines. His face is excited. He doesn't answer any phones. The world doesn't exist. He is studying. So everyone is doing the mitzvahs, and through each mitzvah, no matter how lackluster you do it, you're still connecting to the ray of godliness that this mitzvah reveals, but there's no light. So even though in general, that's what it says, in general, all of us are bringing and connecting and expressing God through the 613 commandments, but in particular, everyone does it in a specific way where they have one or two or many mitzvahs where they feel a great excitement, enthusiasm, and in other mitzvahs where they just do it. So, and this is hinted to in the Talmudic statement, your father, in which mitzvah, not only was he most careful in, but in your father, in which mitzvah did he bring in the light? Or did he feel the light? And the answer was tzitzis. Okay. And this is true not only about individuals, but it's also true about generations. So again, he doesn't say this openly, but it would seem obvious that in the previous generations, going back to a time when Jewish people were really struggling economically, where sadly many places in Europe, maybe 30% to 50% were way beyond what we call the poverty level, literally. So they could not be outstanding in the giving of tzedakah because they didn't have any. They had to take tzedakah. Maybe they were nice and smiled to each other. Perhaps there was an idea of gemilas chasadim, trying to be kind to one another. But without, exaggerating, when you're struggling for existence, you don't have much room or resources to give to others. So perhaps they shined much more through their study of Torah or through other things. Perhaps it was through their dedication to remain Jewish, even though it was difficult. So they were shining in their Mesiras Nefesh. Today, though there is a very beautiful segment of Jewish religious people who study the way they're supposed to, it is a minority. Yeah, there's a lot of people studying superficially, which is beautiful. And perhaps in that case, we're not remiss. In other words, if you look at the rank and file of Jewish people today that know of Talmud, perhaps more people today who know of Talmud actually dip into it than ever before. I don't know if that's correct, but maybe. But certainly to talk about the depth and dedication of Talmud and of halacha, it would seem that we are not extraordinary in that in comparison to even pre-World War II and certainly pre-World War I. However, what we are extraordinary is in the sheer amount of tzedakah that's given. There are so many organizations amongst Jewish communities, whether it be an ambulance, Hatzalah, whether it be the Gemilas Chesed, after death, people come and help you bring the Sidurim and the Chumashim. I mean, it would take probably 45 minutes just to list the list of organizations that Jewish people have created to help one another. And of course, in terms of money, people give really many millions of dollars quietly. I say quietly because not necessarily do you know that your neighbor who makes a fair amount of money actually gives so much of it away to shuls and to yeshivas, etc. So this is the same way we have individuals today as well as individuals in every generation, where some were outstanding in prayer, some were outstanding in something else. And it was through their outstanding scrupulousness in a mitzvah that brought out the light of Hashem. So too, it's also in the case of generations. Certain generations of Jewish people are outstanding in one mitzvah and other in another mitzvah. And I said that based on my understanding of Jewish history, as well as what I heard from our Rebbe, it seems that this generation is outstanding and has to continue to be outstanding in the mitzvah of tzedakah, because obviously we have so much. Clearly, it becomes the material in which we're supposed to serve Hashem in. And he gives a parable. What's the parable? The parable is look at a human being. A human being is one person, and yet this one person has different organs, different limbs. So he's one, and yet there's very specific. Just like you look at one human being who has limbs, Kol Eivre Yeshle Pula Protis, right? Each limb has its own specific effect. Ha'ayin Liris, for example, the eye is meant to see. We don't consider the eye as a deficiency because it cannot hear. If you talk and whisper in front of someone's eyeball, and he says, "I can't hear you," that doesn't mean that there's a deficiency in the eye, because that's not the purpose of the eye. So the eye is supposed to see, and the eisen and the ear is supposed to lishmaya. So to also kach b'chol mitzvah. So to also every mitzvah is another limb. We spoke about this in the beginning of the letter. So each one has another effect. Me'er prati umeyuchad b'chol mitzvah me'er prati. Each mitzvah has its own specific light, umeyuchad, and it is one me'er ein sof baruch hu, from the light of the Ein Sof. V'av shekol nefesh miYisrael tzricha lavei b'gilgul l'kayim kol tayag mitzvahs. Even though every soul of Israel actually will have to come in a gilgul and through the process of a circle of round, which we call reincarnation, in order to fulfill 613 mitzvahs, mikol mokaim still like nitzcha el hadafo zihirus v'zedis uzrizas yiseda b'yesas eis b'yesa os kufula u'mechupelas l'mayla mayla mazida sham mitzvahs. Still, this is only to add to already what this particular soul is going to be involved in a particular way. Let me finish the chapter and then I'll go back to this. And this is what it means, with what was he exceedingly careful about? In other words, it's clear that everything every Jew has to be zahir in something. In addition to that, the neshama will come down again and again and again, so it could complete the entire cycle of 613. This excellence of light to a particular neshama, it's not really that we choose it. It's not, we don't understand why I am or you are you have a special feeling for fasting on Yom Kippur. You don't like fasting, you like to eat, you have a healthy appetite, but you love Yom Kippur. You have a special feeling for it. And suddenly, even if you're hungry on Yom Kippur, it's a pleasurable hungriness, if you know what I mean. In other words, you feel really good, you feel close. Why? Why do you feel like that on Yom Kippur? And other Jews, your next door neighbor, who's a tzaddik in charity, a tzaddik in prayer, a tzaddik, he gets a headache at 11 o'clock in the morning, and the rest of the day is uncomfortable for him. And you're not as holy as he is, and yet when it comes for you, Yom Kippur, you love the prayer, the rabbi, the singing, everything. We don't understand why we have a certain affinity, a certain connection to a certain mitzvah. But it's because Hakodesh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, who gives us our neshama, knows that this is a neshama that needs to excel in this particular light for its completion. It's much higher than the knowledge. And this is the way it arose in Hashem's thought. The Dugma Lamata, who, and to give this as an example below, Bechinas HaGeirel Mamish. It would be the equivalent of picking a lot. Okay. As I say so often, this is a very beautiful and holy concept, and I can only share with you the exceedingly limited knowledge or an inkling of what I think he's trying to say. So here we get into this idea of reincarnation, Gilgul. Before we get there, the last line was that to explain Gilgul, not to explain, in other words, in order for us to have a better understanding or appreciation of Gilgul, it's like the level of Geirel. Okay, so let's talk about Geirel for a moment. Geirel means L-O-T, a lot. It's easier to say the word like dice or lottery. When we talk about chance, C-H-A-N-C-E, right? Even though there are those that claim that you could predict, if you take dice, you could predict what it's going to come. By and large, we accept that if you have a bunch of cards randomly, you pick one out, right? Or if you buy the lottery ticket and you happen to get the one in, I don't know what the statistics are, but it's very high. Let's make believe 1 in 2 million, you happen to hit the letters. Clearly, this is not logical. You could not predict this. And the proof of it is you've been paying, buying this together with hundreds of millions of people and no one ever won. And then suddenly you became lucky. Okay. There are certain things which we can only say destiny. We don't understand. It happened. Now, I and you know that God orchestrated it. But why God orchestrated it, we do not know. What is today's lottery ticket? I was better than yesterday. On the contrary, I might have been doing a lot of mitzvahs, and I thought it was my lucky day and I had all the signs. People smiled at me and my prayers went well and I felt close to Hashem. And then there's a time when you're down spiritually and you win. How do you explain? We can't explain it. The idea of a lottery is it's unexplainable. So the best thing that we say is Hashem made a miracle for you, or a different expression. No, today you had a lot of mazel, M-A-Z-A-L. You had a lot of mazel. What does mazel mean? Something I can't explain is mazel. Okay. So if you study for your test and you know the information and you get an A+, you don't say you have good mazel. You say you studied very hard. But if a person doesn't study very hard and missed many of the lectures and then happened to be given the test where the scattered questions, there are 20 questions, and it just so happens to be over 6 months, he happened to be at that time. And he gets an A+. This guy has mazel. That he was tested on the different classes that he came in for 20 minutes instead of being there for the 2-hour lecture. That's mazel. But the person that studies, comes every single day, we don't call it mazel, we call it scholarship. We call it being studious. Okay. The same thing is when it comes to mitzvahs. Sometimes there are people that are outstanding in a mitzvah. And they themselves cannot explain why. Why are they so outstanding in this mitzvah? I'll tell you something weird. I mean, it's going to sound weird. Imagine a person who eats not kosher. I don't know if you could imagine someone like that, a former yeshiva student who would eat not kosher and yet will never eat bread without washing his hands. Now, you might smile or think he needs a psychiatrist, but the reality is there could be such people where he won't eat bread unless he could wash his hands, and yet the food he's not very careful about at all. In fact, sometimes he knows it's not kosher. If you were to ask him to explain this, he could not explain it. This is a mitzvah. In fact, one is rabbinic, one is a Torah law. So then why did you overlook a Torah law for a rabbinic law? He can't explain. He can't say, well, he was brought up this way. He was brought up with kosher. There are certain mitzvahs people hold on to, which are really, we don't understand it. And the reason why they hold on to this is because this is primarily the reason why their neshama came down. Because in a different lifetime, that neshama did many of the mitzvot, but was not outstanding or perhaps lax and too lenient when it came to washing the hands. And therefore, for the perfection of this neshama, it has to be outstanding in this thing. So there are times when this strange Jew, I call him strange because we don't really understand that. Like, why is he okay eating shrimp, but he's not okay eating bread without washing his hands? He might be tested. He might be on a plane. He might be traveling. He might be pretty hungry, and he could go into any store or get a packaged not kosher, but he has no access to a cup so he can wash his hands, and he'll go hungry. He won't eat the sandwich or something like that, because that is where he is going to shine. There are many, a related story. It's not exact, but this is one of the many stories, and it's a sort of a little bit connected. They say it with the Rebbe, our Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, the seventh Rebbe of Chabad. I've heard it said in other names of other people. It makes no difference. The story is correct. Where there was, but the way I heard it was with the Rebbe, that there was a Jewish boy who was drafted to go into the Korean War. This is in the 1950s when the Rebbe just became a Rebbe. He came to the Rebbe to ask for a bracha that he should return healthy. So the Rebbe encouraged him to do as many mitzvahs as possible, to put on tefillin and so on. But he said, I want you to be very, very careful, especially do not eat the bread without washing your hands. Not very easy to do that mitzvah when you're in combat. So most of the times what he would do is, if there was in the middle of combat or in a place where it's enemy territory, he wouldn't eat the bread. He would eat his cave rations, I think they called it, and maybe it was kosher, I don't know, maybe it was kosher, but he didn't eat the bread. Of course, it was a treat when they had like a respite, where they were told to stand down, to relax, whatever it is, for an hour or sometimes longer. That was different. Then he was able to go to running water and actually wash his hands, and then have the normal food, so to speak. Anyway, the story goes that they were in enemy territory, but they couldn't find the enemy. They were like, a group of soldiers were in a place of danger, but they couldn't find. So the captain told them, well, it seems like temporarily they left. So everyone could, he made a perimeter, obviously, there's a guard But you guys could relax. So they took off their knapsacks, they laid down, people took out their rations, and they began to relax a little bit. And this Jewish soldier wanted to eat, and he remembered that while they were going through, he had seen a creek of water some like 15, 20 minutes away. So after getting permission to go back 10, 15 minutes, I said 15, 20, maybe it was only 10 minutes away. The lieutenant or the captain said, just make sure you're back at this and this time. So he went over there and he washed his hands. And once he was there ready, he decided to eat his food. As he's eating the food, he hears an explosion. Immediately, he puts on his helmet, and he's not sure where it's coming from. And after a minute or two, he realizes it's coming from the camp. And as he wiggles his way back, he realized that they had been led into an ambush. Every one of his group was either killed or wounded. What saved his life was the fact that he was not there. So when they threw the grenades or whatever, he was saved. So it was his washing of his hands that saved his life. Now, it wasn't his tefillin, or maybe it was, I don't know. It wasn't his prayer, maybe it was. What clearly saved his life was his mitzvah of washing his hands. Because probably you could have found a heter, even a legal reason not to wash your hands because it's dangerous. Maybe you could have put on gloves and then held it with held the bread with gloves so it didn't touch your hand. But no, he was very strict. He would not eat without washing. So every single mitzvah has a specific effect and a specific protection. Okay, it's a nice story to end with, so we'll end off with this story. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about this idea of Gilgul. Okay, in the meantime, until tomorrow, shalom everybody. Those of you that would like to join me, tonight we have a class at 7:30.